Okay, this is a lecture on Kant, world federalism, global justice, and in particular interstate relations. So, it's not clear if Immanuel Kant was the first to present us a proposal for international institutions that would try to keep the peace between nations, but he's certainly both fairly early and quite famous. Many people who propose these ideas, that is to say, the idea that international institutions are the solution to the problem of interstate conflict, are pragmatists. They're just trying to avoid war and all the negative consequences on human life and well being that war tends to bring about. Kant, though, had a more duty based approach. His domestic political theory and social contract theory held that individuals had a duty to join some state because outside of a state they were automatically a threat to others. Without a state to govern and regulate their interactions, individuals are in the state of nature. But for Kant, the state of nature is morally unacceptable, not only because it's a terrible place, but because individuals have no right to be threats to each other. In other words, law and its enforcement apparatus is what permits us not to be threats to one another and therefore not to exist in an immoral relation with one another. Now, applied to the international state system, it follows quite logically from Kant's domestic view that states in anarchy with one another are a threat to one another, and therefore states are obligated to join or create international institutions that are capable of restraining and regulating their conduct with respect to other nations. Now, for Kant, world federalism is not world government. In endorsing world federalism, Kant was not saying that a world government would come to control all of our individual interactions with one another. He clearly thought that domestic relations were beyond the authority of any supranational organization, except as it related to their ability to threaten their neighbors. Of course, there's a bit of a difficulty here. Even a large economy or a large population by itself could be constituted as a threat. Even without standing armies, which Kant wanted to abolish, the manpower, income, and technology to raise a large army could itself be seen as threatening. Moreover, a country that uses its status in a large market and its status as a large market, to economically coerce a smaller state into into favorable terms of trade, may threaten livelihoods in a way that makes a distinction between physical and economic threats kind of blurry. If the distinction between threatening and non-threatening behavior collapses, so do the juridical limits of Kant's world federalist system. In other words, a world federal authority would start looking a lot more like a world government because it would be harder and harder to distinguish between purely domestic behavior and foreign other state regarding behavior. The more interconnected the world is, the harder it is to distinguish purely domestic from purely international activity. So what's Kant's legacy in all of this? I think Kant's legacy is largely mixed on the issue of world federalism. International institutions designed to prevent war have often failed. We can only look back at the League of Nations and its failure to prevent World War II, or the Concert of Europe, which failed to prevent World War I. These organizations have failed with fairly catastrophic results. On the other hand, the United Nations and the European Union have, despite all of their flaws, provided a forum for countries to work things out and establish a framework of law and expectations about international conduct that provides some predictability and some direction about how states should behave themselves among one another. His ideas about eliminating standing armies and threat capabilities do live on in arms control treaties and international conventions on the use of chemical and biological weapons. The nuclear disarmament movement is certainly alive and well, and indeed the NPT, the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, states as its end goal to eliminate all nuclear weapons. Kant's Kant's notion that if world federalism was going to work, that its members would have to be republics, today we would call them democracies, still lives on in democratic peace theory. Democratic peace theory is the theory that democracies do not go to war with one another. Another sort of Kantian influence is the article of faith among neoconservative views on international relations, sometimes shortened to neocon, who argue that the U.S. and other countries should promote regime change in favor of democracy in other countries, in part because democracies are more likely to be peaceful with one another. So, on the whole, Kant may not persuade you to work towards abolishing standing armies or submitting our foreign policy to international control, but the benefits of peace are large, and the costs of industrial warfare are large as well. So it's actually possible that we would be justified in taking substantial risks in trying to do things to make the world a safer place. Perhaps that involves taking the risk of establishing something like what Kant had in mind.